Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of proPUCKERS, part of the Tundra Enthusiast News Network. And I'm Mike Fink, and I am joined by two guests today. We've got Edgar Chaput, who covers the Vancouver Canucks and Seattle Kraken for the Hockey Writers, and I've got Cooper Krigbaum, who covers the Arizona Coyotes, and soon to be Utah. We'll fill in the blank, but that's a different topic for another time. We'll discuss that, I'm sure, in the future. So first off, we'll start with you, Cooper. How you doing? And an icebreaker that I like asking is, at what age did you realize you're more likely to make a living writing about hockey or sports in general than playing it?
Well, I actually have never played hockey. I tried getting into skating, and that was the whole thing during COVID. And I'm like, yeah, this is not my thing. So I kind of flipped the page to writing. I'm like, all right, this could actually be something cool. I'm actually going into college next year, so I'll be majoring in journalism, which would be pretty special. But yeah, so really last year was the time where I kind of figured, all right, I could probably do this as a living. So it's been awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's crazy. Like, I was wondering when you said graduating, if you were going to say high school or college, makes us feel old. That's for sure. Edgar, I'm sure you're going to trace back to your high school days soon, but how are you doing? And at what age did you find out you're more likely to write about hockey than cover it? I mean, write it than play it.
I think I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm still trying to make as much money as possible writing about hockey. I can skate. I live in a country and in a city where if you don't skate, people look at you a little bit funny. So I can do that, but I can put me in goal, put me in net. I can maybe make some stops. Don't ask me to score any goals.
Yeah. I think for reference, Edgar's coming to us live from, I believe, Montreal, and Cooper's coming to us from somewhere in Arizona. So
yeah, Phoenix.
We've got the two sides of the continent, pretty much. But we're not going to talk about geography. We're talking about the Stanley Cup playoffs, and I'm glad I got you guys on because you guys are in a unique spot to talk about what I want to talk about this week, which is taking a step back. We're in the middle of the Eastern Western Conference Finals. Two great matchups. Both series are tied at 2. Really fun games. We've got a bunch of back and forth games and a bunch of games that have gone to overtime. But I'm taking a step back and looking on the ice, off the ice. I mean, the team building perspective. And these teams are the model franchises. If you think about it, all 3 have been to the conference finals 2 of the past 3 seasons, at least. Hold on. Okay. And you could say that these teams provide a template for the rest of the NHL to follow. So the thing I'm wondering is, what if you're watching this from a GM's perspective from another team, what would you take away, or what would you look at from these teams and say, okay, this is a thing we should learn from these teams? And I'll start with you, Cooper. What thing are you looking at and saying this is a good time? This is something to learn from these teams.
I think the biggest thing I look at is the depth all the teams have. Like all 4 lines, you have somebody that you go out there and you're like, all right, I have confidence in these 3 players. And especially when I look at the Dallas Stars, is their drafts. They didn't pick first, second, third overall. I mean, they did take Heiskanen, I think it was 4th overall, but they got a bunch of other players like Robertson in the 2nd round. You don't have to draft really high up to be getting these superstars. You can find these players in later rounds. You just got to have a good scouting staff and have a good GM, and I think it's possible.
Yeah, I actually have that sort of in a bigger context note, but yeah, it is the depth, but also in the note of drafting, any team can draft well at number 1 or number 2, and I think with the Stars and really the other teams, it's drafting well later. There's more context to, I think, not just drafting well later, but continuing to build up depth through the draft, the 2nd round, the 3rd round. But it is interesting where those great teams, anyone could draft well at 1 or 2, but it's really drafting 2nd round, 3rd round. And so, yeah, Edgar, you kind of have the same takeaway, or you have a different thing that's kind of standing out for you?
Well, to bounce off of Cooper's point, the fact that the importance of depth especially this deep in the Stanley Cup playoffs, is quite evident. I was going to say something. Well, it's as simple as drafting the next Connor McDavid, but not everybody gets that opportunity, or Connor Bedard. However, about depth and McDavid and the Oilers, I sort of, when you invited me for this show and you gave me the topic, and I sort of looked at the top 4 teams individually. Well, why are they in the semifinals, or conference finals, if you will? And on the top of McDavid and the Oilers, the lesson, I find their lesson is almost, sometimes you just have to change your identity a little bit, which goes back to the depth. Why weren't the Oilers getting maybe as far as they could have? Why weren't they as performant in the West Final a couple of years ago against the Avalanche? Well, it's because they loved scoring goals, but they really couldn't do anything else. I followed the Canucks-Oilers series quite closely because I was covering it from the Canucks angle, and I've watched a bit of the Stars series. This looks like a completely different Oilers team. They're scoring goals. McDavid looks great. Draisaitl looks great. Hyman looks great. They're blocking shots. They're dishing hits. They're not afraid to take some hits. Like, this is a radically different Oilers team from the one we saw a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So it's also about extrapolating the correct lessons from past defeats, which is easier said than done. But I would say the Oilers is a case. I think regardless of however the next few games go, I can tell that they've learned some lessons along the way through bitter defeat.
Yeah, it does seem like there are different, that the sweep against the Avalanche a few years back and the last year's defeat, where it's really rounded out what they are, and really also like this is the different Oilers team, where the cliche is that they're a top heavy team that can put up a lot of points, but then when it comes to winning with defense, they can't do that. And this playoffs have proved, the playoffs and the whole season as a whole have proven otherwise, which is, I think it's kind of the other takeaway is these teams are just well-rounded. They can, I mean, the cliche, win in a variety of ways, but if you need to be able to, when these games slow down, which playoff hockey does, be able to win defensive games, which even in an offensive-driven league, I think that's kind of like an interesting thing where if you're a GM, you kind of still need to, you're always going to need to address defense, and you're always going to need to address these types of you're going to need to address these types of games, which is inevitable. It seems like almost every year. But yeah, with the note on depth. Cooper mentioned the drafting, and this is kind of the second thing that I was thinking about on that is when it comes to teams that draft well in the second round consistently, it's more than they just draft well. It's that they're developing well. And I think when you look at the Stars, the Stars of the class, the example of you can say that Wyatt Johnston was a player they landed at the 20th overall pick and it worked out well. But when you're consistently bringing in players who are young talent, the Hurricanes are like this, but they didn't make it to the conference finals, but you can kind of bunch them in if you want as one of these teams. These teams find a way to bring in, and it's because they're developing through the pipeline, which I think like when you're a rebuilding team, which are a team that's really been in the bottom for a while, that's the big thing I think, because what's unique about hockey and unique about the NHL is you can't just draft your way to the top. You can't get the number one pick. You can't get the top player on the board, and it's going to change everything. The Oilers for years have been this way until recently, and now they're finally experiencing it. So, I mean, that's kind of like the building off the drafting well is you have to then develop well. And then after that becomes like a team building thing where like, okay, what pieces do we find, what complementary additions, but then adding the is continuing to build through the pipeline and continuing to have a good farm system that brings players in ready. And I think for especially the rebuilding teams, that's where you really are looking at. That's like the first big thing I actually have written down as like the big takeaway from this series. I mean, from the final four teams.
Yeah, the Stars are an interesting example of that, where, I know he's a goalie. It's a bit of a different strategy and psychology there. But, Jake Ottinger's been there for a few seasons. Jason Robertson's been there for a few seasons. They're developing Johnston. They're obviously developing Heiskanen. They've sort of trusted a very particular process. They have older guys as well, but they've really put a lot of faith, and they've season by season, it feels like they're putting a little bit more responsibility on the shoulders of the Johnstons and the Ottingers and the Robertsons on that club. And look at them now; they're in the Western Conference Finals in back-to-back seasons. And if things go well, they will represent the West in the Stanley Cup final. They can do it. I know we just sung Edmonton's praises, but Dallas has a very good shot at winning the series.
Yeah, I mean they're both like split 2-2, and it is interesting with the Stars because they had that almost that balance as well of like veteran players where they brought in where it's like you have Joe Pavelski, who's been around for a while, Ryan Suter, and it's like I think it's almost like the other part of it where it's like bringing in that's like almost like the next step of it where it's like bring in these veterans, which I think all these teams have also done in their own way, where it's like you bring in these veterans to they're still producing at a high level, but like what they bring to the roster. And like I guess it's one of those things like Steven Stamkos, a free agent, what his value is going to be is more of just like in the locker room every day, just like that value to a team, if that makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, Edgar, I was wondering if we got to your one of your takeaways, or you have a second one in store.
Oh, I mean, I don't want to hog the mic either, but I did go through the teams. When I looked at the Rangers, and it's funny, they're such a unique team. There's been a little bit of criticism about their 5-on-5 play. They're scoring so many power play goals. They're so efficient on the power play. What about the 5-on-5? Sometimes you just have to know what your strengths are. Now, they're also scoring an absolutely bonkers number of shorthanded goals, which almost makes no sense. That's not something you can necessarily bank on an annual basis, on a seasonal basis, but they're also killing those penalties, to be fair. You can not score a shorthanded goal, but still kill the penalty. Technically, you've done your job. And they're ruthlessly efficient on the power play. So the Rangers are almost a side that's like, look, we have the most awesome special teams units in the NHL, and that's how we're going to get to the conference finals and maybe win a Stanley Cup. So knowing your strength and really, and I mean really honing in on those strengths to the point where teams can do nothing when they're on the power play or on the penalty kill against you. I mean, teams can do nothing against these guys.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how like it was like the thing I said about the I think everyone's saying it about the Hurricanes Rangers series, which is like if they played a 5-on-5 hockey, the Hurricanes win the series, but it's not about that, isn't it? Yeah. What's the name? Yeah, the one interesting thing I was thinking about with the Rangers, just like how well they've built their team, is that they had, I mean, on the note of drafting, which I think Cooper brought up, is they had the number 2 overall pick in Kakko and the number 1 overall pick in Alex Lafreniere. And fast forward, and Kakko hasn't done much, and Lafreniere only recently, which is kind of a story unto itself, has become a star, like not a superstar or generational talent like Bedard or McDavid, but he's all right. He's a good. I mean, he's been playing really well. But the fact that they've had two picks that go one in the top 2 who haven't changed the franchise yet, they're still here, which I think speaks to how well they've built this team. Otherwise, which I think it's like all the other things they've done in a way. So
absolutely. I mean, in this Florida series, I mean, Lafreniere is looking like Mario Lemieux out there. I don't know where that came from. I think we all knew he's a good player. That's why they re-signed him and all that jazz. But it's just changed the number to 66 on the back of the shirt. It's like, oh, Lemieux came out of retirement again and is playing for the Rangers, apparently.
Yeah. I mean, he is almost like a good. I mean, here's another thing for GMs where it's like, if you have a generational talent, I'm not a generational talent, but like one of these top picks, to know that you can be patient with them and know that, like, also to know that not just to be patient, but to know what your expectations should be for them. Because I think McDavid, Crosby, Bedard, they've almost spoiled us in recent years where it's like, oh yeah, the number 1 pick is going to be the next great one. But like for the most part, if I told you you'd get Patrice Bergeron at 1, you'd take that. He's not a generational. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer, but is he that next elite generational talent like McDavid or fill in the blank, one of those superstars? I mean, not quite, but that's part of, I think, the thing with the GM is that knowing you, even if you have a number, even if your number one pick's not generational talent, to know how to integrate them into a roster like that and be patient with them almost. Which
I think that's where development comes in. You got to be able to develop the players. I mean, you can draft all these good players, but if you're not developing them, and if you're rushing them or whatever, you're not going to get those good players. Like if you're drafting at 4, you draft, let's say, Sharks last year with Will Smith. You could have sent him up to the NHL. You probably could have. There's no need to rush him because he's got to go to college. He's got to develop. There's just a whole bunch of stuff you got to do with these young players nowadays.
And I mean, that's also like what I really like about the team building part of this is that not only can you not just draft a rated top, you have to understand each prospect in a way that's very different from any other sport. And you look at the NFL or the NBA, really basketball and football, when they're coming in, they're ready, and then they're immediately impacting their rosters. And the NHL, very few picks are like that. It really, the only other draft comparable for cross sports referencing is baseball, where just like they get drafted at 18 and they're not ready. And then okay, you have to monitor them. You have to watch them for a few years to see where they're at almost. Like for a few years and see like what they're so anyway, so Cooper, you have any other like things that stand out for you? I have one more I've written down, but like I want to see if you have
Yeah, I mean, really, I think another thing we kind of mentioned it with the Stars is the mix of like the youth and like the veterans is so important. Because I mean, you could draft a whole team and like you're not going to win a Stanley Cup with the roster filled with 25, 26-year-olds. It's just not going to happen because you don't have that experience. I think it's really showing in the playoffs now. You need experience to be able to get this far. I mean, even with like McDavid, he's lost a couple times. And now he's like, all right, I kind of am figuring it out. And now he's on his way maybe to the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's also the interesting part is I think what's interesting about getting the veterans is I think we as hockey writers and fans and almost pundits like to kind of bash free agency, or it's very easy to, after every 7-year contract, right, this is going to age poorly and this is not going to be a good contract. It's an easy way of writing about a contract that's 7 or 8 years because usually you're going to be right. And free agency is generally a dumb way to build a championship team. But at the same time, I think when you bring in when you look at some of these teams, they're bringing veterans. Like the Rangers did it, but they didn't do it the way they did. Like you look at Blake Wheeler, they brought in Eric Gustafson, they brought in Jonathan Quick, and all these players, like they're in their 30s, they're well past their best years. But those 3 players that I just mentioned cost them, I think, $2.8 million against the cap. And like for them, they knew, okay, we just need like these players to kind of round out the roster, and their veteran presence in the locker room still brings a lot to this team, and it really has. If you fast forward, like you could still build and you could still bring in players, and if you don't, and almost on the contrary, where if you just say like, oh yeah, we're good with what we have, which is kind of what the Islanders are doing for the past years. You're like, oh yeah, we're good. Then you end up doing nothing. You end up looking worse slowly throughout year in, year out almost.
Yeah, and on the topic of free agency, to your point, Mike, you mentioned, Jonathan Quick and Wheeler, who went over to the Rangers recently in the last year or two. It's one of those things where you're not necessarily trying to catch a big shark in free agency. You're trying to find, well, okay, we lacked a little bit of fourth line depth. We need another left shot defenseman. You're just looking for those little details to get over the edge. I think that's what that's what the point, I shouldn't say the point, that's what the strategy is of NHL free agency, which is, very different from, example, NFL free agency in March, which is just like, goes absolutely off the rail. I love it, but it just goes off the rails. Whereas July in the NHL is like, oh, look at that. The team now has like a good, number 5 score. That could be helpful in the second round of the playoffs. It's more that's what you're doing in free agency in hockey, in the NHL anyways.
Yeah, and also like at the trade, I mean, it's funny because you look back like it's like you look back at the 2022 free agency class. Like Johnny Gaudreau was the biggest free agent. Nazem Kadri was number 2. Like they were like the 1 and 2 guys. And the teams that you look back and like made the best moves. I mean, the Panthers traded for Matthew Tkachuk, and that obviously was the best move of the offseason. I mean, fast forward, but Vincent Trocheck was signed that year. That's like under that theme. It wasn't like the move that's, oh yeah, he's going to get us over the top. It ends up being 7 years, but it wasn't like he's the star that's going to lead us there. He's having a great playoff run, obviously, but he was like that type of signing that like it didn't. And you fast forward and like, yeah, and he ends up, I think he's probably the most valuable free agency signing of that group. Now that you think about it.
Yeah, it's one of those things when a season ends and a team wins the cup or they went deep in the playoffs. You know, that player X had a really nice run. How did they get him? Huh, look at that, free agent.
Yeah. It's like it's the bargain deals. I think this is kind of the big takeaway that I keep thinking about now with especially with the way we perceive general managers, especially with the playoffs, is we kind of think of them as they're moving pieces on a chessboard type of thing, or they're kind of moving players around where it's like, as a GM, your job is to bring in players, bring them up and put them on the roster somewhere and see how it goes kind of thing. And I think with one of the things that's unique, it's not just the NHL, but all GMs is they have to understand it. They're like almost CEOs of a company in a way that they have to understand the type of coaches they're hiring. They have to understand the locker room dynamics. They have to understand when they're bringing a player, it's not just like they're bringing him in to see what he could do on the ice, but like, how is he going to mesh with, how is he going to mesh with the rest of the players on the team? And Lafreniere, like I keep thinking back to Lafreniere where it's like the coach you want to hire, it matters how he views Lafreniere and how he's going to play him how is he going to see him? Like Gerard Gallant him and Lafreniere did not mesh well. Peter Laviolette is clearly gotten the best out of him. And with these GMs, I think it's more than just being like almost, you call it fantasy sports where they're adding players and trading them. There's so much of this. They have to understand what's going on within their organization to the detail. And I think with all these teams, you're starting to see like that they got the players, not just who are good on the ice, but like, and they have the coaching staff or whatever that meshes well with everything that's going on there. And it looks like a well-run organization, I think.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely wild when you think of it, to bounce off of what you've been talking about, Mike, the whole Gallant and Laviolette situation in New York with the Rangers, specifically about Lafreniere. And it's like, wow, this is a completely different player. What have they done? Oh, they changed the coach, even though they were good with Gallant. I think they made a conference final. Am I getting my seasons mixed up? They did it fairly well.
I mean, they did it 2 and 3 years, and they were in the conference final, but they still fired him after the second year. But that's you fast forward, it made sense, kind of, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, there's also hindsight is 20/20, but the Rangers got it right. It's okay.
So I guess we're kind of running low on time. So to wrap up, this is one of the questions I've been asking. Who do you have? We're tied at 2 in both these series. So I guess who wins each series and why? I mean, if you want, you could pick a cup champion, but I'll start with you, Cooper. Who do you have winning each series and why between these 4 teams?
Okay, for the Western Conference, I'm gonna have to go with my gut and just say Stars. I think right now they're just. I know they what is it? It's tied 2-2, but I think they overpower. I think their depth, goalie especially. I think Andre is a little bit more well down his road right now into catching on fire. And then the Eastern Conference, I'm gonna go Rangers. I think the Rangers will pull through, and then it'll be Dallas and New York, which I think that would be a fantastic series.
Yeah, I actually picked the same thing, and for the same reason. I said if I'm gonna bet against anything, I'm betting against Stuart Skinner, which is a terrible thing to say. Like, oh, I'm gonna bet against a goaltender, but like and it's crazy because like even in their victory in Game 4, I was like, felt like, oh yeah, this is why I bet against Stuart Skinner. Like, there's anything I can bet on. But I mean, at the end of the day, like I also picked Stars and Rangers. I picked in 7, so that seems like the most accurate part of this whole thing. So Edgar, what do you who do you have winning and why?
Oh, just rinse, repeat everything you two have said. I was going to say it's going to be a Rangers Stars finale. I agree with Cooper. I think Jake Ottinger is it. As if I'm a genius, Jake Ottinger is a better goalie than Stuart Skinner. But that matters when you're this deep in the playoffs. With all the respect I have for Stuart Skinner, who's had to bounce back quite a bit in these postseason series, and he has. I think Ottinger's better. I think they're slightly more well-rounded team. And hey, as long as this insane penalty killing and insane power play functionality is going well for the Rangers, somebody has to stop them, and nobody has. So let's go Rangers Stars for the Stanley Cup final with a Rangers win.
You're gonna go Rangers. I'm gonna bookmark my Stanley Cup final winner. But yeah, I guess we're all going Stars and Oilers here. I mean, Stars and Rangers to win that. I mean, they're both, they got the 2 home games, so kind of bookmark that as a slight advantage. I actually think the Stars going back home does make a difference, just like based on the way the conditions, the way the ice looks. That actually it does feel like it is interesting. Like, you feel like they're playing a faster game in Edmonton, and it showed in those first 2 games where the players moving faster, and it just felt like better conditions for hockey, where it's like Dallas, it's like a much more slower defensive game. But anyway, that's just like one of those things that I've been thinking about recently, but that's an aside. All right, so we're running low on time, so any quick plugs? We'll start with you, Cooper. Any quick plugs, articles you might be working on, or where could we find you and whatnot?
You can find me on Twitter or X, Cooper Krigbaum, and then I just put out a mock draft for Utah, Utah Coyotes. So it's still the same thing to me, but I'll have to get used to that. But you can check that out at the Hockey Writers, and yeah.
Nice. Yeah, we're gonna figure out the whole what to call anyone I have on the Coyotes League, Utah Hockey Club, until they get a team name, which hopefully soon.
Weird.
But
yeah, I know.
Well, that's like the whole Arizona thing. We'll definitely have a discussion on in the future, because it's worth an episode on its own. But that's like off season stuff to push on. So Edgar, where can we find you? Any good articles you got in the works, and anything you want to plug quickly?
Well, that's an excellent question. Are there any good articles that I write? No. Well, these days, I had a great time covering the Vancouver Canucks, but that writing team is quite solid. I'm kind of flying solo in Seattle, so it's a lot of. I did a round 1, what they might do, and as of this recording, I am about to do my my homework for what could they do in round 2, because we spoke about the Rangers. They have 2 second-round picks, thanks to a trade with the Rangers. So look for that on the Hockey Writers soon. Yeah. Today, tomorrow.
That ends up, I think they traded Alex Wenberg, and that could be a win-win trade when you look back, because Wenberg helped the Rangers a little bit. We'll see if he ends up helping them win a Stanley Cup. That's kind of where you decide who really wins this trade or not. But anyway, so thank you for we're out of time now, so thank you for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe. This is the 4th episode, which is, of course, our honorary captain. There's a few stay-at-home defensemen we could choose, but we've got to go with Bobby Orr as our honorary captain for this one. Number 4, Bobby Orr. So we'll be back next time, and stay tuned as we'll do next week for another great episode. Thank you.